Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam bahagia, and good day to all my dear students. We meet again for the second lecture with me, Muhammad Faizal Muhammad Bukhari. And for this time, we will look into photosynthesis. We are still under Learning Unit 2, Biochemistry, Cell Structure and Function. Mostly, under this LU2, Biochemistry, Cell Structure and Function, we will bring you to learn the internal space, the internal structure, or the intercellular component of the cell. And when it comes to my part, talking about photosynthesis, we will look into the intercellular structure of plant cell. To be specific, the chloroplast. Because we know, based on my previous lecture, we talked a lot about transport and gases exchange in plant, whereby the process involved in transporting water and translocating the food. Transporting the water from the soil up to the leaf. Meanwhile, translocating the food from the leaf to the other parts of the plant. Now, the one main component which involved in transport and gases exchange, which is leaf. So what is so important about leaf in plant? Therefore, in today's lecture, we will look into the functions and how the leaf play their role in order to sustain and to support the life cycle of plant, especially in producing food, so that the plant can grow, so that the plant can develop and contribute into the humankind's need. Now, in this slide, this is just a point to ponder before we start on into the details of the photosynthesis process which take place in the plant. We know that photosynthesis is a process of converting light source into energy. And this photosynthesis is a natural process. Can we force photosynthesis to take place? Can we increase the rate of photosynthesis, or even to reduce the photosynthesis, or even up to the extent to maintain the rate of photosynthesis? Yes, we are. We can do that artificially with the assistance of light source and also source of water and mineral. But however, we can't control the mechanism which take place in the inner part of the plant cell. I mean, the photosynthesis which take place in the intercellular level. We may control the factor which can contribute into the rate of photosynthesis. Therefore, photosynthesis is a natural process. Photosynthesis is where plants to create food, to manufacture food, to produce food in the form of sucrose. Photosynthesis takes place in mesophyll cell, to be specific in the chloroplast, to be more specific the thylakoid membrane. Where is a mesophyll cell? It is embedded in between the upper epidermis and lower epidermis of the plant cell. Photosynthesis occurs when the plant's root absorb water. Yes, photosynthesis requires water. Without water, there will be no photosynthesis. Therefore, volume or amount of water is also another factor determining how effective the plant conducting photosynthesis. Water is carried to the leaf where CO2 is obtained from the air. Now it comes to another pair of components required for photosynthesis to take place, which is CO2. CO2 diffuses to the chlorophyll containing cell. Yes, the water being absorbed initially from the roots up to the leaf. Meanwhile, this CO2 diffuses directly on the leaf surface, especially into the chlorophyll containing cells. There are other parts of the plant which contain chlorophyll. However, most of this CO2 diffuses into the chlorophyll containing cell, especially in the leaf. Chlorophyll, which is the green pigment, they are the one who convert the light energy into a storable form of energy, which is glucose. Chlorophyll, which is the green pigment, they are the key player in photosynthesis, works in converting the light energy into a storable form of energy, which is glucose, in the source, which is the leaf, before distributed or allocated or disseminated throughout the plant system, which require this food to be transported to. And photosynthesis is essential for human life. As plants convert the CO2 we exhale into oxygen that we need to breathe. Yes, so we know that photosynthesis, to be specific, the plant with human, we are accompanied one to another by producing oxygen, CO2, and we exchange the gases for the purpose of continuation of life. According to the Oxford Dictionary of Biology, photosynthesis can be defined as photo is light and synthesis means putting together or compose. Therefore, light putting together in compose is a chemical process by which green plants and other phototrophs synthesize organic compound from carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight. Let's look at the definition of photosynthesis once again. According to Oxford Dictionary of Biology, so the photosynthesis can be determined as a chemical process by which green plants and other phototrophs synthesize any organic compound from carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight. There are three terminology which was highlighted here: carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. Besides, we have green plants and other phototrophs. So carbon dioxide water, and sunlight. They play a very significant role in determining the process of photosynthesis. And this process occurs in all green plant and other phototrophs organisms. The learning objective for this lecture, at the end of the day, I do hope the student will be able to describe the light reaction process and Kelvin cycle, the alternative of carbon dioxide fixation pathway in photosynthesis, the differences between C3 and C4 plants, and finally, the limiting factors in photosynthesis. The learning objective for this lecture, there will be 4 of them. Light reaction process and Kelvin cycle. In this objective, we will scrutinize the light reaction and Kelvin cycle, especially in a common type of plant, which is classified as C3 plant. The alternative of carbon dioxide fixation pathway, this is where we are going to look into the details of C4 and CAM type of plant in performing the photosynthesis. The differences between C3 and C4 plant. What are the special about C3 and C4? What are the special characteristics to distinguish between C3 and C4 plants? And finally, the limiting factors in photosynthesis. There must be a few lists of factors which determine the photosynthesis rate. So now let's look at what is chloroplast. Photosynthesis occurs within light-absorbing organelles called chloroplasts. Photosynthesis occurs within light-absorbing organelles called chloroplasts. There are other parts or other components or organelle which can also do or perform photosynthesis, but level of capacity and capability of performing photosynthesis is only goes to chloroplasts. Their green color is from chlorophyll. Chloro referring to green and phyll is the organelle, a light absorbing pigment. So now we know the one that do the work of absorbing the light is the pigment called chlorophyll. In most plants, the leaves have the most chloroplasts, almost up to 500,000 per millimeter square of leaf surface. It means that regardless of any size of the leaf, the efficiency of the leaf to perform photosynthesis by having chloroplasts in the leaf structure is optimized. And chloroplast is the major location of photosynthesis. Here we can see the diagrammatic features of chloroplast together with the microscopic structure of the interior part of the chloroplast. We know that on the left bottom diagrammatic features, it shows the leaf cross section and where the stomata is located. The stomata functions in regards to photosynthesis. They do open for absorbing carbon dioxide and they do open to expel the oxygen. Chloroplasts, they are made up of the outer membrane, the inner membrane, the stroma, the thylakoid, as well as the granule. Here we can see the stack of thylakoid in one full stack. They call it granule, and they are suspended in the space called stroma, covered by the inner membrane as well as outer membrane. This is the detail of chloroplast. Chloroplast concentrated in the interior cells of leaf where CO2 enters and oxygen exits through tiny pores called stomata. Chloroplast is a double layer membrane envelope, and the inner membrane encloses a compartment filled with thick fluid called stroma. Suspended in the stroma are the interconnected membranous sacs called thylakoids, concentrated in the stack called granule. The chlorophyll molecules that capture light energy are built into the thylakoid membrane. So why do the thylakoids are in stack? This is simply because stack of this structure will aid or facilitate its function in providing a large surface area or a better surface area for the reaction of photosynthesis. If I ask you a question based on the early information given to you, what is actually the most specific component or even structure which perform photosynthesis? Is it chloroplast? Is it chlorophyll? Is it thylakoid? Is it a thylakoid membrane? Is it a granule? Or is it a grana? The answer will be the thylakoid membrane. So bear in mind the specific structure which conduct photosynthesis in plant is thylakoid membrane. The thylakoid, they stack together becoming a grana. The plural of grana is granule. And all of these granule embedded or suspended in the thick fluid compartment which enclosed by the inner membrane as well as the external membrane of chloroplast. From the diagrammatic features showing in this slide, we can see there are stroma covered by the inner membrane which suspend all of the granum, the grana, as well as the thylakoid in between. And they are lamella, a one-piece layer of membrane connecting or supporting all of the granum and one to another. They stack one to another. And within the thylakoid, we can see the lumen. There are ribosome as well as the chloroplast DNA. Back to the questions again. What makes the thylakoid when they are in stack and they can perform well and effective in performing photosynthesis? This is because stacking of thylakoid will increase the large surface area for the reaction of photosynthesis to take place. This is the overall equation for photosynthesis, a very common where they have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water to produce glucose as well as 6 molecules of oxygen. Along the line, they need solar energy to convert the light energy into a chemical energy. In this process, they will produce ATP as well as heat. So now, this is how the overall photosynthesis process involving light radiation and Kelvin cycle will take place. From this diagram, we can see we have sources of light, H2O, water, we have carbon dioxide producing oxygen as well as sugar. There are 2 separated processes on the left and right, which is light reactions and Kelvin cycle. All of the processes are within the chloroplast structure. In light reaction process, the process requires light energy as well as water to produce oxygen. Based on the light reaction, they will produce energy in the form of ATP as well as NADPH. And this ATP and NADPH will enter the Kelvin cycle, followed by the absorption of carbon dioxide to produce sugar, as well as NADP and ADP plus phosphate. So this reaction will take place as a chain reaction as long as the photosynthesis occurs, as long as the light being exposed, as long as the water being supplied, the carbon dioxide being absorbed. Therefore, there will be a releasing of oxygen as well as sugar. So these two reaction or process, which is light reaction as well as Kelvin cycle, is considered as a common and a normal photosynthesis process in plant cell. Let's move on from one reaction to another reaction until we can see the whole picture of how sugar can be produced in plant cell, especially in the leaf as a source. In light reaction process, the chlorophyll in the thylakoid membranes will absorb solar energy, then converted this energy into the useful chemical energy, namely ATP as well as NADPH. So, in a process of light reaction, chlorophyll in the thylakoid membrane, they will absorb solar energy, then converted into the functional chemical energy called ATP and NADPH. Chlorophyll will absorb solar energy not in the mean that energy directly needed. However, this chlorophyll, when they absorb solar energy, they absorb in the form of wave. So this wave will convert the chemical energy into the next level, which is the Kelvin cycle. In light reaction process, the absorbed solar energy in the form of light, they will drive electron from H2O to NADP. NADP is oxidized form of the energy carrier to form NADPH, which is in the form of reduced energy carrier. So now we know during light reaction process, the cell needs light to drive the electron from H2O to NADP, which is the oxidized form of electron carrier, to form ATP as well as NADPH, which is the reduced form of electron carrier. This product, ATP and NADPH, will function later in Kelvin cycle. But before that, water was split to provide a source of electron and giving off oxygen as a byproduct. So now we know one of the main purpose, one of the main reason of water transport in plant, which highly needed by the plant cell because they provide energy in the form of electron. In order to produce oxygen as a byproduct of the process. So based on this slide, we know that water or H2O, they function ultimately in producing source of electron. And this electron will be carried through the light reaction via oxidized form of electron carrier, which is NADP, by the help of light. In order to produce ATP as well as the reduced form of electron carrier, which is NADPH, to be carried into the Calvin cycle in the latter process. And based on this process, they produce oxygen. In Calvin cycle process, the cycle will use the products of the light reaction to power the production of sugar from CO2. ATP generated by the light reaction will provide high energy for sugar synthesis. Meanwhile, the reduced electron carrier, which is NADPH, produced by the light reaction, will also provide high energy of electron for the reduction of CO2 to form glucose. And we can say Calvin cycle process depends indirectly on light to produce sugar. However, Calvin cycle and light reaction, they are interconnected and they are dependent to each another. Let's recap the Calvin cycle. This cycle of process uses all the products produced by light reaction to power the production or to generate the production of sugar by having CO2 into it. And we know ATP as well as NADPH are the products produced by light reaction. And this ATP will provide high energy for sugar synthesis. As well as NADPH, they will provide high energy of electron for the reductions of carbon dioxide to form glucose. We have talked a lot about light reaction process. And definitely in this process, the main key factor is the light itself. It is a process where converting solar energy or light energy into a chemical energy, which is in the form of ATP and NADPH to be used in Calvin cycle in order to produce sucrose as well as ADP and phosphate. Now, during the normal day, the sun will emit energy in a broad spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. I repeat again, in a normal day, the sun will emit energy in a broad spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. This form of energy in a broad spectrum will capture by the chloroplast, especially the thylakoid membrane, in order to perform light reaction process followed by Calvin cycle to produce food in the form of sugar. These light and other electromagnetic waves are composed of individual packets of energy called photon. So now we know photon is like an electromagnetic wave which has been packed individually, becoming a packet of energy to be called photon. So all of the individual packets of energy of this light and electromagnetic wave is called photon. The energy of photon corresponds to its wavelength, and this wavelength can be translated into short and long wavelength, and they will also reflect the intensity of the energy based on the short or long wavelength. If they are a short wavelength, therefore they are very energetic. Meanwhile, long wavelength, they are low energy. So now we know photons based on the corresponding wavelength, and this wavelength can be very energetic or low energy, depends on the length of the wavelength, which is short or long. And based on the diagrammatic features given in this slide, we can see the wavelength will increase in our daily life activity, ranging from gamma ray, X-ray, UV, infrared, microwaves, and a radio wave. However, these wavelengths are also translated into the daily living use. For example, gamma ray, which is short or shortest wavelength, followed by X-ray, followed by ultraviolet, followed by infrared, followed by microwaves, followed by radio wave. So based on this wave, we can say that short wavelength would translate into a danger and energetic wave. For example, gamma ray, X-ray, and UV. That's why we have been taught to avoid to expose into this type of wavelength, which is gamma ray, X-ray, and ultraviolet, which normally used in medical facility. Meanwhile, infrared, microwave, and radio wave are mostly exposed to our light, especially involving infrared, for example, in detecting human body temperature. Microwave, we use it frequently in the kitchen, and the radio wave, we use it frequently to listen to the radio. And what about in the aspects of photosynthesis? At what wavelength, at what energy level the light or the individual packets of energy, which called protons, can be used? In plant, the photosynthesis process, which involves the light reaction, especially the light emits energy, the spectrum is between the UV and infrared, which will be translated into the visible light. And this visible light, the wavelength are ranging from 380 up to 750 nanometer. These visible lights are useful in photosynthesis. Based on the photon or individual packets of light energy, when a specific wavelength of light strikes an object, it can be either absorbed, reflected, or transmitted. I repeat again, when a specific wavelength of light strikes an object, it can be either absorbed, reflected, or transmitted. This specific wavelength of light which will strike an object, we are referring to the visible light or the visible wavelength, which are ranging from 350 up to 750 nanometer, which was influenced and involved in a photosynthesis process. And this specific wavelength from 350 to 750 nanometer, when they strike an object, they can be either absorbed, reflected, or transmitted. Absorbed light can heat up the object or drive biological processes. Meanwhile, reflected or transmitted light can reach the observer's eyes, perceived as the color of the object. I repeat again, absorbed light can heat up the object or drive biological processes. This is what happens during photosynthesis. Any light energy which strikes on the object, especially the leaf surface, they will be absorbed, they will heat up the object, and they will also undergo biological processes, namely the photosynthesis. Meanwhile, the other remaining light, They may be reflected or transmitted as what we can see the leaf as in the green color. So what I mean by reflected or transmitted light can reach the observer's eyes, and these will perceive as the colors of the object. What makes we see tomato as in orange? What makes we see apple as in red? What makes we see sunflower as in yellow? What makes we see the leaf as in green? It is because of the reflected or transmitted of the light on the object, and the transmitted light which actually reflects the color that we see the object. Knowing chloroplasts in the process of photosynthesis is very important, especially when we talk about the chloroplast membrane. To be specific, the thylakoid. The chloroplast contain various pigment molecules that absorb different light wavelengths. Chloroplast contains various pigment molecules that absorbs different light wavelengths. That's why we can see there are ranges of wavelength starting from 350 up to 750 nanometer wavelength. So this range, it depends on the pigment molecule which will absorb different light wavelength. For example, chlorophyll A, they are strongly absorb violet and red color of wavelength. Meanwhile, chlorophyll B, they are more into blue and red orange. There are other types of pigment molecule which known as accessory pigment that absorb additional wavelength of light and transfer them to chlorophyll. For example, carotene. Carotenoids absorb blue and green light. So from the diagrammatic features showing in this slide, we can see chlorophyll A. They are more into, or they are specified into absorbing violet and red light, which translate into the wavelength from 400 as well as 700 nanometer. Meanwhile, chlorophyll B, they are more into specified of blue and red orange, and the wavelength strength is about 500 and 650 nanometer. The other types of pigment molecule will also do the same thing, which is selective wavelength absorb, depending on what types of pigment molecule and what type of light wavelength to be absorbed. So now we know in plant there will be a various number of pigment molecule in the chloroplast which will absorb different types and different level of wavelength, but all together they will function to perform photosynthesis. The longer the wavelength, the lower the energy will be absorbed. The shorter the wavelength, the higher energy will be absorbed. Therefore, we can see the green light, which translated into 500 nanometer, is the most optimum of light energy to be absorbed in most of the plant. And the range of green light is located in between blue and green light, and the range of wavelength is in between 400 to 550 nanometer. And this is the energy that most of the plant absorb.